Well, hello there. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Joseph Armendariz.
And I'm Ryan Holt.
And today we're going to talk to you about constructing your curriculum vitae, or CV, and some of the do's and don'ts of that.
We'll also provide you some recommendations and examples for constructing your CV.
Yeah, we look forward to working with you today.
Great, so now let's take a look at where the word curriculum vitae comes from. This is a Latin term, comes from curriculum, meaning course, and vita, meaning life, and it often will translate into the course of one's life. And historically, it's been used in academic or applied settings, and some applied settings may be your practicum internship sites or even a hospital setting. And when you're applying for a grant or even a fellowship, you'll be asked to submit a CV. And oftentimes this will be a shortened version of your CV and will be about 2 pages. So you'll only be able to highlight some important things that you've done. And another question that's asked quite often is a CV the same as a resume? And the short answer to this question is that the CV is going to contain more of your academic and research-oriented goals and won't include maybe some other jobs that you've had off campus, whether it be in a grocery store, a restaurant, or department store, versus your resume may contain all of that information.
Now let's go over the different sections of a CV.
Now, oftentimes you may want to include a summary profile or some of your interests that would capture the reader's attention as the first thing on your CV. And this might be if you were involved in some research project where you're able to increase the reading performance of students in a school district, and then you really want to let the reader know that was something important that you've done. Following this, you want to include your education, whether it be credentials or degrees, that will let the reader know that you have the skills necessary for that position. Next, you'll want to include your professional experiences that highlight academic jobs that you've had, whether it be a research assistant or even teaching, and you would want to make sure that you can provide somewhat of a description of each of those as well as your duties and responsibilities. Following this, you would want to include your references for all of the research you've done, whether it be publications or your conference presentations, posters, and speeches as well. Lastly, you will want to include your honors and awards that have culminated from all of these different experiences. And what actually will tie right into a lot of these is if you've gotten grant money for some of the research projects that you've done, or even travel awards, or have been recognized for your work in these areas.
Now you can also include your extracurricular and volunteer experiences. Now you want to keep this as relevant to the field that you're applying for. You probably wouldn't put volunteer experiences that don't necessarily pertain to what you're going for, but try to keep it as close to it as possible. If it's relevant, you could put it in there. Now here's some optional sections for you to consider including in your CV, and that would include certifications and licensure. You may also want to include your professional affiliations such as APA or NASP or WPA, EPA, and also what languages you're proficient at, whether it's extremely proficient or moderately proficient. That's an important consideration that people may have when they're looking at your application.
Now I want to go over in more detail one of the sections in your CV, which is these professional experiences of employment and teaching. So you're going to list all of your academic employment on campus and even off-campus research that you've done, or any kind of invited lectures. So maybe a school has asked you to come and present some of your research findings or give a psychoeducational talk, and you would want to list that and be able to speak to that a little bit in the description there. And again, this is not going to be your typically retail or fast food employment that you've had in the past, unless it was experience at a managerial or supervisory level, and that where you could make it relate back to the employment or position you're applying to. Then for teaching assistantships, you would want to list the courses that you've taught and maybe some of the description of some of the things that you've done for this course and that you may want to highlight. Additionally, as mentioned before, you would want to list these invited lectures or presentations, whether it be on campus or for off-sites. Great, so now that you have seen kind of those components there, here are some examples of what you may include in your employment and training section. In this, it's really important that you include the location or the name of your employment or position that you hold, and then you would want to provide the reader with a time frame that you've been there, and maybe even include your supervisor, so that this reader, if seeing them in the reference section, may be able to reference back to how you know this individual. And again, as you see in the bottom part of this slide, there are some examples of invited lectures. Again, making sure that you have all the important details there to alert the reader to what you did in that lecture and kind of the time frame of that as well.
All right, and that brings us to our next section on research. So in research, you would want to put the grants that you've applied for and also received. You also want to list all the publications that you've been on. That's just going to show your history of productivity. It's important to build and continue to maintain throughout your academic career. You're also going to want to list your conference publications, anything that you've gone and presented at a conference, such as NASP, poster presentations or invited lectures, stuff like that. You're going to put that in there. And your lab affiliations, you want to talk about who you've been working with and provide a description of what you've done under that position while working for that individual. Also, you want to include your undergraduate/master's theses. Put that in there because it's going to show that you've been able to work and complete a larger project that you've mainly been involved with. All right, so let's go ahead and look at an example of what this all looks like. So right here we have a brief description. We got Joseph up there, and he's working with a couple different people during 2015 on event structure and cognitive control. It's got the journal, just like a normal APA, publication. Now down here we've got some poster presentations that I've been involved with, and just stuff I've presented at APA or WPA or NASP and stuff. You put it there. And as you can see on the bottom one, me and Joseph have worked on some stuff before on Mad Genius Stereotype, which was pretty fun. And also we have another example right here of a laboratory position that I worked in. I put my advisor, the years I was there for, and a brief description about what I did.
Great, so now I want to focus on some of your applied experiences that you would want to include on your CV. And first, this could be in your practicum and internship sites, where you would list those yearly experiences and your supervisor, as well as some descriptions of the activities you did there. In addition, you may want to include some special positions that you held, whether it be training other trainees there or even some presentations that you did in a professional setting. Additionally, for service and leadership, this would be a subheading as well, that you may want to include some volunteer activities. So for a professional organization such as the Rhode Island School Psychology Association, did you provide service for them as contributing to maybe the website, or even attending some of their meetings to be as part of a subgroup there or subcommittee? You may have been invited to review papers for different journals, and this is where you would want to include that service as well. Lastly, if you've been involved with working with the department chair or even the program director, you would want to speak to that and describe some of the tasks you did. For example, the program may hold some outreach event for bringing in new school psychology students, or even dissemination of some of the things that students have done. And so you may want to speak to that in this section as well. So now let's take a look at how this might look on a CV. And here you can see that practicum experiences are listed, and you would want to describe the task that you're doing there. So for this first one in particular, it says intellectual assessment. And then following that, you may want to include the time there that you've spent in this position. Following that, you would want to include the location of this. So here it's the clinic, South County Child and Family Specialist. And below that, you may want to include the supervisor as well. Again, including some of these responsibilities here so you can give the reader a brief synopsis of the things that you were doing there. And then lastly, again, some of these service and leadership experiences, you want to include the organization and the time that you were involved with them. Then you may want to include, again, things that can highlight some of the service and leadership qualities that you can bring to the table.
Great, so now that we've gone over constructing your CV, I'd like to go over a few tips and considerations.
It's not recommended to put curriculum vitae at the top of your CV because the organization has already asked you for your CV, so, just avoid redundancy. Now, as suggested at the beginning, you may want to include a brief profile or summary of your accomplishments or interests that might help tell the reader a little bit more about yourself. All right, next you want to present your CV in a reverse chronological order. And what that means is you want to start with your most recent accomplishments and work backwards towards the beginning. That way your reader gets a good sense of what you've most recently done and where your research interests or other types of practical experience interests are at this moment. You also want to organize your CV based on the role that you're applying for. So if you're applying for a research position, you're going to put your research position stuff first. And if you're applying more for an applied setting type of position, you're going to put that section first. When you're organizing your CV, you want to make it look nice. So you're going to want to use italics, bolds, underlines, bullets to make it look like it makes sense rather than it being a big mess. There's already a lot of information on there. Make it as easy for your reader to understand, and that means also, avoiding jargon and acronyms. It's a good thing to number every page of your CV so that way a reader knows where they're at. And it's also a good thing to use font size 12 Times New Roman, just like you do for everything else. Now you can also include references within your CV, and these may be individuals who helped write your letters of recommendation. That way whoever's reading your CV can know who to contact if they want to get further information about your accomplishments and what you've done.
So now I would like to briefly close with some other considerations and highlight some of the things that we've talked about in this presentation. So again, as Ryan mentioned in the previous slide, it's really important that you make sure your CV is tailored to that specific role. So for example, if it's a research versus teaching position, in that research CV, you would want to maybe put all of your presentations and publications and research-related material toward the start of your CV versus the teaching CV where you want to put some of those teaching and applied experiences toward the front to really highlight your skills in that area. Next, again, we talked about creating or putting a summary profile at the top. And again, this is just going to alert the readers to some of those important things that you've done previously, maybe some things that you really, really want to highlight. Again, it's all about maintaining that organization, the structure to what's important for that role, but also being consistent across your CV. And again, want to make this look as polished and professional as you can. And you maybe want to give this to a few of your colleagues or even professors to look over and kind of see what catches their eye and some things that you may want to work on. So the ultimate goal of your CV is always to make sure that it's easy to read. And this can be accomplished by having people within our field of school psychology as well as others in different fields, even non-academic spheres, kind of looking over your CV to ensure it's understandable and professional. Lastly, you may want to have a full length as well as a 2-page condensed version on hand in case some of the positions you're applying to require this. For example, the URI Graduate School, when you apply for the Diversity Fellowship or Graduate Fellowship, they require a 2-page version of your CV. So you're not able to include all of the things you've done. It's only going to highlight some of those professional academic experiences. Now to end, I want to make sure we include our references here. And for the first reference that we pulled from was McPherson, Resumes versus CVs, Best Practices.
We also found on the APA.org website a great resource for constructing your CV as well.
And PsyChi had a great example of some of the things to use for your CV.
Additionally, the graducla.edu site has some really good recommendations for constructing your CV.
Thank you for joining us today in our presentation on constructing your curriculum vitae.
We hope you enjoyed yourself and learned something.